I'm sorry about that last one, son. I tried to cut it down and didn't realize. But this is Life Review 2, and just so you'll know, there are about 13 lectures coming on Life Review. Okay, second segment of Life Review. Get my fingers out of here. Beyond the Light by P.M.H. Atwater. Phyllis is a researcher and an author, and I think I said she's probably got a half a dozen or more books on the near-death experience and many others. So a couple of quotes from her book. My mother and I were driving out to the lake one afternoon. My dad was to follow later when he finished work. We were having company for dinner, and as we rode along, my mother spotted some wildflowers at the side of the road. She asked if I would stop the car and pick them, as they would look nice on the dinner table. I pulled over to the right side of the road. It was not a major highway. Parked the car and went down a small incline to get off the road to pick the flowers. While I was picking the flowers, a car came whizzing by and suddenly headed straight for me. As I looked up and saw what I presumed would be an inevitable death, I separated from my body and viewed what was happening from another perspective. My whole life flashed in front of me from that moment backward to segments of my life. The review was not like a judgment, it was passive, more like an interesting novelty. I can't tell you how many times I think of that near-death experience. Even as I sit here and write my story for you, it seems as though it happened only yesterday. Second one, and this was on page 22. Mine was a difficult birth, according to my mother. She said she didn't hear me cry after I was born because I was a blue baby. They did not bring me to her for 2 days. My face was black and blue, and she said the skin was all cut up on the right side of my face. That's where the forceps slipped. I was given a tracheotomy to help me breathe. I am totally deaf in my right ear. Also, the right side of my face and head is less sensitive than the left. When I get tired, the right side of my face droops a little, like Bell's palsy. I'm 40 years old now. All my life, going back to my childhood, I can remember having this same recurring dream. Now, this is not actually a life review. She frames it in the form of a dream. It is more vivid than any dream. It starts and ends the same. I am kneeling down and bent over, frantically trying to untie some kind of knots. They almost seem alive. I am pulling on them and they are thick and slippery, and I am very upset. Pulling and snapping. I can't see what they're made of. I remember getting hit in the face while trying to unite or break free of the knots and waking up crying. Then I would go back to sleep thinking it was only a dream or a nightmare. When the dream would happen again on another night, I would sleep through it longer as I began to get used to it. After I am able to sleep through the naughty part, suddenly my struggling stops. I feel like a puppet with all the strings cut. My body goes limp. All the stress and struggle is drained right out of me. I feel very calm and peaceful, but wonder what caused me to lose interest in the knots. They were important 1 minute. The next minute I am floating in this big bright light. So she's now out of her body. I know I can't touch the ground because there is light there too. I look at the light and try to move toward it. I can't. And this upsets me. There is a woman in a long flowing gown floating away to my left. I call and call to her, but the light is so bright, sound does not travel through it. I want to talk to the woman, and my dream ends there. About a year ago, I walk out of my house to go to work. The ground is wet from rain, yet I find this book lying there, dry. No one is around, so I pick it up. The book is called Closer to the Light by Melvin Morse, MD, and Paul Perry. It is on the near-death experience of children. That night I start reading it, and I cannot put it down. For the first time in my life, I now understand my dream. Those knots were when I struggled in the womb with the umbilical cord. Getting hit in the face is when the doctor grabbed me with the forceps. Then I died. After that, I went into the light. But wait a second. You're not supposed to remember being born. We don't just sit around at parties and talk about what we remember of our birth. We only talk about what our parents tell us. I look forward to having my dream again. I'm ready now to experience more of it than before, and without being upset. I have a brief lecture on people's experiences with the womb, in the womb, entering the womb, and of course leaving the womb, being born. And that'll come later on. But she had an out-of-body near-death experience, and it came back to her as a dream. Okay? Reflections on life after life, and this is a follow-up to Raymond Moody's book. So Raymond Moody Jr., and I am quoting on page 34. I first was out of my body above the building, and I could see my body lying there. Then I became aware of the light, just light, being all around me. Then it seemed there was a display all around me, and everything in my life just went by for review, you might say. I was really very, very ashamed of a lot of the things that I experienced because it seemed that I had a different knowledge, that the light was showing me what was wrong, what I did wrong, and it was very real. It seemed like this flashback or memory or whatever was directed primarily at ascertaining the extent of my life. It was like there was a judgment being made, and then all of a sudden the light became dimmer and there was a conversation, not in words, but in thoughts. When I would see something, when I would experience a past event, it was like I was seeing it through eyes with, I guess you would say, omnipotent knowledge. Omnipotent, that's better. Guiding me and helping me to see. That's the part that has stuck with me, because it showed me not only what I had done, but even how what I had done had affected other people. And it wasn't like I was looking at a movie projector, because I could feel these things. There was feeling, and particularly since I was with this knowledge, I found out that not even your thoughts are lost. Every thought was there. Your thoughts are not lost. How am I doing on time? Oh my goodness. Return from Tomorrow by George Ritchie. And as I've suggested to you before, Raymond Moody was a student in George Ritchie's class early in his training. And George Ritchie's experience, which hadn't been published yet, was one of the things that inspired Raymond Moody to start making collections and eventually to write the book. Okay. When I say he knew everything about me, this was simply an observable fact, light being. For into that room, along with his radiant presence, simultaneously, though in telling about it I have to describe them one by one, had also entered every single episode of my entire life. Everything that had ever happened to me was simply there in full view. Contemporary and current, all seemingly taking place at that moment. How this was possible, I didn't know. I had never before experienced the kind of space we seemed to be in. That little one-bed room was still visible. This is on the military base. But is no longer confined us. Instead, on all sides of us was what I could only think of as a kind of enormous mural, except that the figures on it were three-dimensional, moving and speaking. And many of these figures seemed to be me. Transfixed, I stared at myself standing at the blackboard in a third-grade spelling class, receiving my Eagle badge in front of my scout troop, wheeling Papa Dabney onto the veranda at Moss Side. I saw myself a tiny 2.5-pound infant, panting for breath in an incubator. Simultaneously, there seemed to be no earlier and no later. I saw myself lifted by cesarean section from the womb of the ill and dying young woman whom I had never laid eyes on before. So he goes on to share some of the experiences in his life review, this being whom he says is Christ. What did you do with your life? He sees how mean he was to his siblings, step-siblings, and to his stepmother. And those of you who read it know the most significant thing he could come up with was he had received his Eagle Scout Award. What have you done with your life to show me? Already I understood that in my first frantic efforts to come up with an impressive answer, I had missed the point altogether. He wasn't asking about accomplishments and awards. The question, like everything else proceeding from him, had to do with love. How much have you loved with your life? Have you loved others as I am loving you, totally, unconditionally? Hearing the questions like that, I saw how foolish it was even to try to find an answer in the scenes around us. Why? I hadn't known love like this was possible. Someone should have told me, I thought indignantly. A fine time to discover what life was all about. Like coming to a final exam and discovering you were going to be tested on a subject that you had never studied. If this was the point of everything, why hadn't someone told me? But though these thoughts rose out of self-pity and self-excuse, the answering thoughts held no rebuke, only that hint of heavenly laughter behind the words. I did tell you. But how? Still wanting to justify myself, how could he have told me and I not heard? I told you by the life I lived. I told you by the death I died. And if you keep your eyes on me, you will see more. Okay, George Ritchie. Now the last one in this segment, Ordered to Return, is by George Ritchie. It had a different name. Is it back here on the back? No, but it originally had a different name, and then they changed it to Ordered to Return. And just one quote from his. And again, as I've said before, these people who write second and third follow-up volumes give a lot more insight and depth to their life review and their near-death experience. I'm quoting from page 34. When he spoke, I heard him in a way different from anyone else. I heard him from deep within my own soul, my mind, not my brain. For my human brain, as far as I could understand, was in my head and body lying on the bed, and it still looked just as dead as when I had first come back into the room. The first thought he transformed into my mind was, "What have you done with your life?" He asked this question in a Socratic sort of way, certainly not for information for himself, since he and I both could see my total life here on the earth. It seemed to me he wanted me to see and review my life, not as I had seen or thought the circumstances surrounding it to have been, but as they actually were. Significant difference here. I could see my birth and the death of my own mother a month later. I could see that I was so tiny my father brought me home in a shoebox he had gotten from my maternal grandfather. A short time later I could see my sister, Mary Jane, who was almost 3 years older than I, along with Miss Williams and my grandparents and father, looking at me in the crib. So he goes on to see these people in various relationships that he's having with them, and the birth of step-brother and stepsister. Then he concludes with this these thoughts. And again he's responding back to the question. In answer to his question, I thought I was an Eagle Scout. In answer to his question, I suddenly made a shocking discovery. He was immediately aware of what I thought, and that made it impossible to say one thing and think another, as most of us do on this plane of our existence. This new discovery showed me that hypocrisy was impossible. That glorified you. What have you done with your life? He asked for the second time. I was president of my college fraternity, I mentally responded. What have you done with your life to show me? He was too kind to call to my attention I had been voted president after a lot of my fraternity brothers had been called into service. It's World War II. I knew what he meant, for the question he was really throwing at me was, what have you done in your life to show the love I taught you to live? I'm going to get a little preachy here. I think if this is happening to Danny and Brinkley and to George Ritchie and others, it's a question we ought to consider daily in our own lives. I hedged again. Had he been at all condemning in his attitude, I would have been petrified with fear. As it was, I knew I not only failed if I answered that question truthfully, but my real confusion was that since I had never known this type of love before I met him, how could I possibly know how to give it out? I am too young to die, I thought. No one is too young to die, for physical death is only of the body and a temporary doorway to another realm through which you have just passed. He brought this to a close by shutting off the panorama of my life. He notified me mentally that he wished me to stay close to him. We left the hospital room by rising straight up through the roof, and then we headed over the surface of the earth at a very rapid speed. I found myself again utterly amazed at our being able to travel in this fashion and full of curiosity as to where we might be heading. That's the end of Life Review 2. Oh, I'm sorry, son. There's too many things for me to remember.